So now you've got some tracks created. You need to make sure if you create the tracks and you don't have this option to select inputs from your interface, you're going to have to go into your studio setup and make sure that you've got everything set up properly. So we'll go into that now. So you click the studio setup button, and it has all this kind of devices that are connected. So VST audio system is the one that you're really worried about, and sometimes, if you have multiple interfaces connected, you'll have a few different options down here. But right now I've only got this Steinberg one. So as I can see, everything is here and active on the outputs. You can look at the control panel, which brings up your driver for your individual interface. I've got this buffer size set pretty high. That's actually good for mixing, but we're going to be tracking, so I'm going to want to drop that down to something much lower. Essentially, this creates lag if you have it really high. So if you're mixing, it doesn't really matter because it's processing and you're hearing the playback. But if you want to hear live audio coming in through your recording system, you're going to need to set that buffer size pretty low. And you can play with it a little bit. As you can see, it kind of changes the latency. The lower you go, the lower the latency. I find 128 or 196, or sorry, 192. This is like 8 milliseconds of delay that you're going to hear. And between input and output, there's only 1 millisecond of delay. Whereas if you're up at 2048, you're at 4 milliseconds of delay between them, and 50 before the input is even heard. So that's basically unusable. But on mixing, the buffer size just gives the computer a little bit more power, a little bit more buffer within the unit itself to play back into your headphones. So you want that high rate when you're mixing and a low rate when you're tracking. Over here, you can set your sample rate. We're doing 44.1, which is pretty standard. 192 is like crazy high definition audio. 48's pretty standard, I think, these days too. But 44.1 is the level of audio detail that you get on a CD, and I think a lot of recording gets done at this rate still. It's kind of a historical standard, and I think most people, the default setting is this 44.1, because the higher the sample rate is, the more hard drive space each individual track that you record is going to take up. Not really a huge deal these days with bigger hard drives and stuff, but I'm on actually a solid state hard drive on this computer, so I like to keep this small. Audibly speaking, you can hear a difference with the higher sample rates. I never really record above 48. I just find that the difference in quality isn't really enough for me to worry about, especially when I'm doing kind of big rock and roll songs with lots of stuff going on and lots of distortion and things. But for the purpose of demoing, certainly 44.1 is all you're going to need. Cool. So with that done, we are now certain that we have the correct audio interface selected, so we can press OK. The next thing you're going to want to do, and it's kind of already done here, is go into your audio connections. So now that you've got an interface connected to Cubase, you need to set up connections within Cubase. So I've already done this too, but it usually has a default setting where if it's a 2-channel interface like this one, it'll have a stereo input. So I'm in the input settings here now. I created 2 new inputs, which are called buses, and I wanted them to be mono. And I set them to input the correct inputs. So I want my mono input 1 to be input 1 on my interface, and my mono input 2 to be input 2 on my interface. And we don't really need 3 and 4. So if you have an 8-channel interface, you'd want to set up 8 inputs probably. And if say you had a pair of microphones and you wanted to record a stereo acoustic guitar as one track, you could set this stereo input to the same thing, 1 and 2. And you could record 2 microphones. You could also record the 2 microphones in mono, and honestly I would recommend that instead. Then if you've got one microphone is set slightly higher volume than the other, you can change it later. Whereas if it's on a stereo setting, it's gonna sound kind of weird. So I'm actually gonna delete this stereo input if it's gonna let me do that. Great. Yeah. So you can see, like, when I deleted that stereo input, the stereo input over here kind of disappeared. There's a mono input that's kind of mono input 2 is kind of freaking out a little bit. I think I've got a cable sitting on the ground somewhere, and so it's kind of mucking around there. And you can see, my voice is getting picked up by mono input 1 now, even though I don't have the monitor on, as you can tell by this blue bar. So we're set up now. So we've got both of our channels. Both of the channels know what input they need to be pulling from. And on our tracks, we've got those same channels, those same buses plugged in. So those buses, if you think about it, they drive your audio from your inputs into Cubase onto your tracks. So it's sort of a bridge between the audio in your room and it's getting picked up by your microphones and the capture of that audio in Cubase. So we'll do a quick little test just to show that that's functional now. Our vocal channel, we can see that it's working. We're not peaking the meter, so I'll reset that. So the loudest I'm coming in is in this kind of minus 13 decibel kind of level. If I talk really loud, it goes to -4. So even if I'm talking super loud, it's not peaking the meter, and that's kind of what you want. So that's all setting levels on your interface with the little knobs for gain that you have on there. I know exactly where I need to set my gain input for this particular microphone, so I've already got that set up, but that's something you're going to need to do before you start recording. So we'll do a little test recording here now on the vocal channel. So to do that, you need to make sure record is enabled. If you want to hear what you're recording at the same time, you would turn on this monitor button, but that'll create feedback. I'll just show you crazy feedback. We'll do a quick recording of that right now. So that's enabled, and then you go down. This is your this is called your transport bar. So that's where you set up a lot of your important settings for recording. So for this little test, we don't have to worry about it too much. We just need to know where the stop, start, and record buttons are, and that's right in the middle here. I actually have this separate popped out one, which I don't really need because there's one at the bottom too. So just turn that off. So this is record enabled. Now you once the track you want to record is enabled, you just click the record button on the transport panel like this. So now we are testing and recording audio. And to stop it, you can just hit spacebar, or you can hit stop down here, number pad 0. There's a few different options. So let's play that back. Just gonna make sure that OBS is recording it as well. So now we are testing and recording audio. And to stop it, you can just hit spacebar, or you can hit perfect. So we've now got our interface talking to Cubase, and that's one of the biggest hurdles that most people starting out tend to encounter is making sure that they can get a signal coming in and recorded, and at a level that is going to be workable. So I'm just going to change the colors of these channels as well. That's something I always like to do. I tend to do my my vocals in this light blue color and guitars in green. Not sure why green, but green and blue. But you know, if you set up your project color coded, it makes it a lot easier when you're flying around in the session and you have, you know, a full band worth of guitars and bass and drums and pianos and everything, and vocals and backing vocals. If you have it color coded, it just makes it way easier than if everything's gray and you're just trying to read the names of the channels. The colors are a much quicker way to kind of find where you're going. So I'll delete that vocal test recording, and we'll get into actually recording some guitars. So if you're going to record a song, you're going to want to set your tempo. You're going to want some kind of metronome to play along to, so that you know that you're playing at the right speed, and that everything's going to line up. Especially if you're collaborating with other people online, which a lot of us are doing these days. You're going to have to set your tempo. So that's something you do from the transport panel. So if you don't know the tempo of your song, there's some easy ways to figure that out. So what I would suggest is you just go to Google and type tap tempo online. There's a few that come up. I usually just use this first one. It's super basic, but it gets the job done. So you know, start strumming your song, maybe even record a piece of it in Cubase and then play it back, and you can just kind of tap along. And this software will generate a tempo based on whatever rate you're tapping at. And so once you have that rate and you kind of know where your song is supposed to be tempo wise, you can go back into the session and set your tempo to whatever it needs to be. So the song I'm going to record right now for this demo is I already know the tempo of it is about 70 beats per minute. So I'm going to set that up. And you saw there was a jump here. What that actually did was it changed the length of these bars, because a bar at 70 beats per minute is a different length than a bar at 120 beats per minute. So you can set the time signature here. This song's just a 4/4 time, super basic. Some of the other buttons down here in the transport panel that you'll want to look at are the metronome. So you can activate it just by pressing C for click. That's how I remember it. And you can change your metronome too. Right now I've just got kind of the basic beeping one, which is fine for me. I don't really love that, but honestly I like to, if I can set up a drum pattern instead, that usually tends to be a bit better. You can also change your patterns of your click as well. I've got this default one where it's just like a high beep and then 3 low beeps to kind of signal 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what I'm going to use for now. But you can set that up with drums. I find an easier way. I've never really done it that way. What I will often do is I'll plug in one of these VST instruments. So maybe we'll do that now, just so you guys can see how that works. But I'll plug in a drum instrument track, so that I can have drums to play along with. So Groove Agent is the one that comes with Cubase. It's pretty basic. The drum sounds in it I don't really love. So I'm going to use this Steven Slate drum sampler. It's called SSD, and I'm going to add one of those. And as you can see, the default Cubase one looks very similar. It'll pop up with a bunch of different stuff that you can use. So what you first need to do is assign some sounds to these drums. Like I'm clicking them, you don't hear anything. So this song is kind of a bluesy song. We'll just do sort of a rock track. So you gotta assign a kit sound. So let's go with this Zeppelin drum sound. Those are always cool. So it'll load all these samples into these drums. Cool. So now we have drums. So in order to actually have those drums make any sound, we also need a MIDI track.